Hi, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining this session. As described in the synopsis, over the next 20 minutes, what we'll discuss is the fundamental shift that we're seeing in the threat landscape. The shift from threats targeting infrastructure to increasingly what we're calling people-centric security. Those are the threats targeting our people, the new perimeter, the threats that are trying to socially engineer our people into interacting with them and fundamentally breaching data, installing malware, causing disruption, and causing loss of money. And so what's driving this shift? Well, it's digital transformation. Over the last year, there's memes that have been taking place that we've seen where, what's driven your digital transformation? Is it your CEO? Is it your CIO? No, it's the coronavirus pandemic. It's the fact that we've all quickly had to enable new technology, cloud computing, new services to allow our people to continue to work and get access to data via, lots of different locations, typically at home. And yet, our people are still getting access to sensitive information. Our people are sharing that sensitive information on, social networks. They might be using new collaboration tools. They're still using email to communicate with each other and to communicate with suppliers and customers. And for the first time, truly, in 2020 into this year, people have become the perimeter of our organizations. No longer is it the firewalls and technical controls we've put in place. No longer is it the centralized data center that we've had on premise. Increasingly, that data and that access is moving out of the corporate network, and our people have access to those crown jewels outside of the corporate network. And the criminals recognize that. They too are transforming digitally. They too are leveraging cloud solutions to host their malware, to host those threats that they then ultimately send to our employees. We've seen that the vast majority of malicious messages targeting customers are sent from Microsoft's own infrastructure. Cybercriminals are uploading malware onto SharePoint. They're uploading malware onto OneDrive. They're leveraging Microsoft Forms, and they're sending their malware via email to employees within the business. So it's become increasingly difficult for us to detect the difference between good and bad because OneDrive and SharePoint are the definition of good. In addition, the criminals recognize that our people are increasingly storing sensitive information in these cloud services and leveraging these cloud applications to access that data. That's why 93% of organizations out there have been targeted with credential phishing attacks, where the criminals are trying to steal the usernames and passwords, the identities of our people to get access to that sensitive information that's now being hosted on Office 365 and other cloud computing services. 58% of organizations have at least one compromised account. That means the criminals now have legitimate access to all of that customer data, intellectual property that we're moving to the cloud. And yet the way in which we're thinking about security controls is still sometimes with that legacy mentality. We're still spending the vast majority of our budget protecting a network that we're increasingly outsourcing. We're spending the vast majority of our budget protecting a network that our employees no longer sit within. And the criminals have pivoted. 96% of the breaches that Verizon analyzed, of the 4,000 or almost 4,000 breaches that they analyzed, 96% were social engineering. They required somebody to do something, to click on a link, to download the malware, or to wire the money or send the data directly to the criminal. Just a small percentage of those threats were actually looking for technical vulnerabilities. The majority needed somebody to do something. If we look at it another way, ransomware, it's in the news. Everyone's concerned about ransomware, the disruption that it's causing, the loss of ability to do business, the ultimate impact to the bottom line of the organization. These ransomware attacks are actually still being delivered via email. They require somebody to open that attachment to enable those macros and ultimately compromise the network. Looking at financial losses, most loss from cybercrime is still from business email compromise. Again, these are those email fraud attacks where the criminal is pretending to be a trusted individual, whether it's an executive or a supplier, to trick our employees into wiring money or sending data directly. And so to summarize in terms of that threat landscape, before it was really all around spam, broad attacks to as many people as possible. Then we had those exploit kits and macros that were still really leveraging these huge botnets. They're widespread. The scale is huge, targeting a number of different organizations. But then we move into 2019, into 2020, and we see a shift into much more targeted attacks, where the criminals have done their research, not into our network, but into our people. They understand who's in finance. They understand who can process payments. They understand who's working with customer data. And they are sending emails to those individuals to trick them into sending the company's money directly to the criminal. And then again, in 2020, what we started to see is that supply chain attack, right? Where our people are no longer able to check an invoice with their employee, their colleague, their manager. They're getting lots of invoices from suppliers. There's a lot of disruption taking place. Businesses are going under. Everyone's in a heightened state of stress. And so you're much more likely to react and respond to an email that you get from a supplier demanding payment. And so, what do those look like? Here are some examples. The first is a business email compromise attack. This is where the criminals pretending to be an executive, leveraging the COVID-19 pandemic, and again, the stress and anxiety of this pandemic, the heightened state, emotional state that our employees are in. And this email is claiming to be from an exec, and it's saying, hey, we've got this great acquisition opportunity. It's a company that's distressed right now, so they're struggling financially. And we're very close to closing on this acquisition of this company. It's very time sensitive. I need you to keep this confidential. What we did was we actually were able to identify and block this email from reaching the employee. But if we hadn't blocked it and we allowed the employee to engage, the next request would probably have been, I now need you to wire X million to this account so that we can complete this acquisition. So this is where the criminals trying to steal the finances of the organization, the money of the organization. This example, also leveraging COVID-19, in fact, what we saw in 2020 was an almost 90% shift to these email phishing attacks leveraging COVID-19. Most of the themes and the subjects and the content were around, the vaccine, access to that. It was around shipping. It's around the disruption that COVID-19 is causing. Hey, you need to work from home. Click on this link to see employees that have the coronavirus. In this example, it's saying there's a vaccine available. You could be on the list. Click on this link, give us your details so that we can put you on the list to get access to your dose of the vaccine. But again, what the employee does if they click on that link is either download malware or they give up their credentials directly to the cyber criminal. And the final example here is that supply chain attack that I mentioned earlier, where we're increasingly seeing criminals inject themselves into email communications, pretending to be the supplier, updating invoice information, updating bank details so that future payments are sent directly to the cyber criminal instead of to our true supplier. And so if we look at this a different way, this is data from Verizon, where they looked at the three key types of threats that were leading to data breaches. Number one is that use of stolen credentials. Criminals getting access to the usernames and passwords of employees, getting access to their Office 365 environments, getting access to their cloud environments, and stealing data through that access, that legitimate access. Number two, still phishing. Email and phishing links sent via email are still leading to data breaches. Number three is actually human error, people making mistakes. And what we can see here is the vast majority of those breaches had a human element to it. It requires someone to give up their credentials. It requires someone to open that phishing email. It requires someone to make a mistake. And summarizing that shift in the threat landscape is really this graphic here, where we and oftentimes still have this network view. We're creating network schematics, the endpoints, the servers, the databases. We still got this on-premise data center view and layered firewall view, when the reality is the criminals have pivoted. Their point of view is the people. Who are the people that I should be attacking? Who are the suppliers and third parties I should pretend to be to get an employee to ultimately click? And so that's why we need to change our thinking. We need to have a people-centric view of security. We need to, first of all, block the vast majority of these threats from reaching our people via email. Then we need to protect the people themselves. We need to protect that new perimeter. We need to make sure that they're trained, that they're able to identify these threats, that they alert us to these threats. And then finally, we need to protect their credentials and the access that they have, the access that we've granted them to that sensitive information, to that intellectual property. And this really correlates with what we're hearing from industry and what we're hearing from some of these analysts, where on Forrester's side, they've said, use technical controls to block these emails and malicious web traffic from reaching users, but you also have to support this with user awareness training by changing those risky behaviors. And in addition, Gartner said that you need to update to the latest version of your secure email gateway. Identify and detect criminals spoofing your identity. Block criminals pretending to be your executives or pretending to be your suppliers, trying to trick your employees into interacting with their payloads. So that's really fundamentally about protecting that number one threat vector, where over 90% of threats are being delivered via, and that's that email channel. How do we do that? Well, we need to move upstream. Yes, we can detect and respond and try and identify these threats that are being delivered on the endpoint, but oftentimes that's too late because somebody's already done something. Somebody's already clicked on a link, and you don't know who they forwarded that email to, who else has interacted with that threat. We need to move upstream. We need to identify what controls we have in place in email security. Identify these new business email compromise attacks, identify these ransomware attacks that are still being delivered via email, and block as much as possible from reaching your people, from reaching that new perimeter. And then we need to make sure that the people themselves are resilient. We all need to be aware that the criminals are targeting us, that we are that new perimeter. We need to be aware of the ways in which criminals are trying to bypass technical controls to reach us. We need to be aware of the layers and the techniques that the criminals are using so that we can be alert and less likely to make mistakes. And what does that look like? Well, it first starts with visibility, understanding your VAPs, those very attacked people. Who's vulnerable? Who keeps clicking on links? Who keeps giving up their credentials? Who keeps installing malware? Who's vulnerable? Who's under attack? And what attack exactly is targeting them? And then finally, who has privilege? Who has access to sensitive data? Who has access to new systems? Who has access to customer data? It's only by understanding your VAPs, those people that are vulnerable, the people that are under attack, and who's privileged, can we then implement controls to protect those VAPs. And here's an example of what that can look like. This is a global advertising company. They assumed that the CEO, of course, was the most attacked person, right? The CEO is constantly getting phishing emails. But the reality is, it's actually the PR managers, those people that are working on sensitive information, those people that have access to information pre-release, those people that might be working on financial statements with the investor relations team before it's released to the market. The criminals want access to the data that they have access to. So they're sending them stealers. They don't want you to know that they're monitoring. They don't want you to know that they're watching and collecting all of that information. And so, based on this insight, this advertising company knew that, in fact, we need to focus on our PR managers and all of that sensitive information that they're processing and make sure that it doesn't get into the wrong hands. So, it starts with that visibility. It starts with identifying the risk. Who's clicking? Who has knowledge? Then it's changing behavior through training programs, ongoing training programs, not once a year, but in time based on how you're working. And then it's reducing exposure, embedding people into our security controls, making sure that people can very simply click on a button if they think something's malicious. And that email is automatically sent to the SOC team, it's automatically sandboxed. If we find that it's bad, you're right, thank you. Pull those emails out of everybody else's inbox, starting to bring people and technology together. And then finally, we need to look at access. We've seen so many examples recently, again, because of the disruption that's taking place. There's a lot of change that's taking place. Some people are looking for new jobs. Some people are working on data. We've given more access. And so they're accessing parts of the environment that maybe they shouldn't. We're seeing an increase in insider threats, an increase in our own employees that are taking information and potentially taking it with them to the new job or giving it to a competitor or even giving it to a nation state. So we need to be able to protect the data and the systems that our people have access to. And again, that's understanding the behavior of our people. Data protection cannot just be about the data itself anymore. We can't rely on just data classification and putting DLP policies in place. We need to understand the behavior of the people. Should this person have access to this information? Should this person download from Office 365, rename it to, a JPEG, upload it to USB, or upload it to Dropbox? Understanding that behavior, the telemetry of the user, gives you indications and indicators that this person might be doing something malicious, or this person might be making a mistake because they're not aware of the policy around data security. So, really, in conclusion, bringing this all together, people centric security is about realizing that our people are a new perimeter. Our people have access to that sensitive data. Our people are processing payments, and our people are under attack. They're under attack via email. It is still that number one threat vector. So we really need to implement controls that block the vast majority of those email threats from reaching that new perimeter. We need to make sure that our users themselves are resilient and that they are aware that they're under attack. We need to protect their credentials, those cloud credentials that give them access to that data that's increasingly moving away from our on-premise data centers into the cloud. And we need to do all of this through visibility into our people risks. And so for those that don't know Proofpoint, that's exactly what we offer. We offer that people-centric visibility. We protect your users via the email channel. We protect the data as it's migrating to the cloud, and we protect that access to sensitive information. We give you visibility into potential malicious insiders so that you can quickly remediate when you identify that something's taken place. But also critical to call out here is the integrations, because we cannot do this in isolation. Your technology needs to work together. It needs to be integrated, it needs to be automated, and we've got technical integrations with CyberArk, Palo Alto, Okta, CrowdStrike, so that if we see something on email, we send it to the endpoint so that you're protected end to end. And what we're offering for everyone that's listened to this session today is a free assessment. So if you would like to understand your very attacked people, if you'd like to understand your people-based risks, please let us know and we'll be more than happy to offer that assessment to you. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been valuable. And if you have any questions at all, please do feel free to get in touch. Thank you.